The Battle of Midway, fought between June 4th and June 7th, 1942, was not just a battle, it was a turning point in World War II. At stake was control of the Pacific, with both the United States and Japan prepared to risk everything for dominance in this vast and critical theater of war. Japan's remarkable success in the first years of the war had placed it at the forefront of military power in the Pacific. Yet, as the Japanese fleet prepared to launch their decisive attack on Midway Atoll, a seemingly insignificant speck of land in the Pacific Ocean, the U.S. Navy had already gathered key intelligence to cripple Japan's naval dominance. In this video, we will explore the strategies, tactics, intelligence operations, and the courageous individuals who played pivotal roles in what would become one of the most decisive battles in naval history. Midway Atoll, located approximately halfway between Hawaii and Japan, might seem like a mere dot on a map, but for the military, its strategic significance was enormous. Positioned as a vital military outpost for the U.S. Navy, Midway had an airfield that could detect enemy fleets across vast areas of the Pacific. Capturing Midway would give Japan the upper hand in controlling the Central Pacific. It would also give them the ability to launch further attacks toward the U.S. West Coast, securing their dominant position. That's why Japan saw it as crucial to their grand plan of expanding their empire across the Pacific. For the United States, Midway was more than just a strategic island. It was a symbol of resistance. The Battle of Midway was not just about military tactics, but about preventing Japan's further encroachment into the Pacific and protecting American interests. Japan's strategy for the Battle of Midway was deceptively simple. The plan was to lure the U.S. Navy's carriers into a trap, decimate them with overwhelming air superiority, and take control of the island. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, Japan's fleet commander, believed that this would secure the Japanese Empire's dominance in the Pacific. The Japanese had been successful in nearly every battle since Pearl Harbor, and their fleet, consisting of 4 aircraft carriers, was the envy of the world. Yamamoto and his staff, however, were blinded by their success and believed that the U.S. would be caught off guard. They underestimated not only the American resolve, but also the power of intelligence and surprise. While Japan was moving forward with their strategy, they were unaware that their entire plan had been compromised. The United States had cracked Japan's secret military code, and the U.S. Navy knew exactly what Japan was planning. The intelligence breakthrough that would determine the outcome of the Battle of Midway came from the tireless work of U.S. codebreakers. The United States had been intercepting Japanese radio communications for months, and in early 1942, they cracked the JN-25 code, the most vital Japanese naval code. What the Americans discovered was a critical piece of information. Japan was planning to attack Midway, and the date was set. The U.S. now had an edge, knowing when and where the attack would happen. But this intelligence advantage had to be leveraged in real time, as Japan's fleet was already on its way. The breakthrough was the result of an extraordinary team effort, including the work of Lieutenant Commander Joseph Rochefort, the head of the cryptanalysis team, who masterminded the interception and interpretation of Japan's secret transmissions. While Japan's fleet was still sailing towards Midway, the United States, armed with vital intelligence, rapidly mobilized their forces. Admiral Chester W. Nimitz, the commander of the Pacific Fleet, faced a critical decision: to strike before Japan could fully prepare, or to wait for a more direct confrontation. The U.S. had only 3 carriers in the region: Enterprise, Yorktown, and Hornet, compared to Japan's 4. The key was to use surprise and coordination. Nimitz understood that his forces had to strike at the right moment and leverage the element of surprise to outmaneuver the enemy. The U.S. Navy's attack strategy relied heavily on coordination between different military branches, particularly the Navy's air wings. Fighters would protect bombers, while dive bombers would focus on attacking Japanese carriers, the lifeblood of the Japanese fleet. At the heart of the U.S. Navy's strategy were the aircraft carriers Enterprise, Hornet, and Yorktown. These carriers were the backbone of the American offensive, but they had been hastily prepared for battle. Yorktown, for example, had been barely repaired after the Battle of the Coral Sea just weeks before. These carriers weren't just ships, they were mobile airfields. Each carrier carried a complement of bombers and fighters, essential to the success of the mission. The crews were ready for a battle like no other, and as the battle commenced, their skill and bravery would prove crucial in tipping the balance. On June 4, 1942, the battle began. The Japanese launched their first wave of attacks on Midway, hoping to destroy the island's defenses and neutralize the airstrip. This would clear the way for their larger fleet to move in and crush the U.S. presence in the Pacific. As bombers made their runs on Midway, American forces scrambled into action. Fighter planes were launched to intercept the incoming Japanese planes, while U.S. ground forces prepared to defend the atoll. Despite the surprise attack, the U.S. was not caught off guard as the Japanese had hoped. At the same time, the U.S. aircraft carriers launched their own strikes. It would be a race against time to see whose strategy would dominate the Pacific skies. As Japanese bombers approached, U.S. fighter pilots scrambled into the skies, engaging in furious dogfights with the Japanese Zeros. The skies above Midway were soon filled with the sounds of aerial combat, as both sides fought for supremacy. The American pilots, although outnumbered, fought with determination. Many of the fighter planes were armed with only limited fuel and ammunition, but the stakes could not have been higher. The outcome of this battle would be determined in the skies. In a move that would prove pivotal, U.S. dive bombers from the Enterprise and Yorktown launched a well-coordinated attack on the Japanese carriers. As the bombers dove toward their targets, the Japanese had little time to react. The U.S. bombers hit their targets with incredible precision, sinking 3 of Japan's most powerful aircraft carriers, Akagi, Kaga, and Soryu, in a matter of hours. This attack dealt a devastating blow to the Japanese fleet, crippling their ability to strike back. Despite the devastating losses, Japan's last remaining aircraft carrier, Hiryu, still posed a threat. In a desperate attempt to turn the tide of the battle, Hiryu launched several attacks on the USS Yorktown, which had been damaged in earlier strikes. The Yorktown was hit once again, but the Americans quickly retaliated. U.S. bombers, using their experience from the earlier attack, launched their final strike against the Hiryu. After a series of direct hits, the Hiryu was set ablaze and eventually sank. Japan's last hope had been extinguished. As the battle came to a close, the cost was clear. Japan had lost 4 of its best aircraft carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu, along with over 300 aircraft and hundreds of experienced pilots. The blow was devastating, and Japan's ability to project naval power across the Pacific had been severely crippled. On the American side, the losses were significant as well. The USS Yorktown, after being hit by bombs from the Hiryu, sank the following day. Despite this, the United States had achieved a remarkable victory, sinking 4 of Japan's carriers while only losing 1 of their own. The strategic advantage had shifted decisively in favor of the United States. The loss of Japan's carriers was irreparable, and it marked the beginning of a series of American victories in the Pacific, including the Guadalcanal campaign and the eventual defeat of Japan in 1945. The Battle of Midway was not just a tactical victory, it was a psychological one as well. For the United States, it marked a critical shift in the Pacific War. The U.S. Navy had proven it could defeat Japan's seemingly invincible fleet, and this victory gave the American public renewed hope and resolve. In Washington, the news was greeted with jubilation. The American public, reeling from the shock of Pearl Harbor, now saw that Japan could be defeated. Midway represented the first real American success in the Pacific War, a crucial morale boost. For the Japanese, the defeat at Midway had far-reaching consequences. It shattered the myth of Japanese invincibility. The Japanese Navy was never able to fully recover from the loss of its carriers, and the momentum in the Pacific War had irreversibly shifted toward the United States. Midway was the first battle where aircraft carriers truly demonstrated their power, and it would shape the future of naval warfare. The battle marked the beginning of the carrier age in military history, where the focus shifted from battleships to aircraft carriers as the primary weapon in naval combat. Before Midway, battleships had been the dominant force in naval combat, but the battle proved that aircraft carriers, with their ability to strike at distant targets and control vast areas of ocean, were far more powerful. The U.S. Navy would go on to develop its carriers further, setting the stage for future engagements and laying the foundation for the modern naval power we see today. The success at Midway demonstrated the importance of air superiority in naval warfare, a lesson that would be applied in future conflicts, including the Korean War, the Vietnam War, and beyond. The Battle of Midway would not have been possible without the leadership of Admiral Chester W. Nimitz, the commander of the U.S. Pacific Fleet. Nimitz, a calm and calculated leader, used the intelligence gained through code breaking to create a strategy that would surprise the Japanese and secure victory. Under his command, Admiral Raymond Spruance led the U.S. Navy's offensive actions at Midway, including the strategic use of dive bombers against the Japanese carriers. Spruance's tactical brilliance allowed the U.S. to capitalize on the Japanese mistakes. Another key figure was Vice Admiral William Halsey, who was not physically present at Midway due to health issues, but had a pivotal role in ensuring the success of the operation by overseeing the preparation of the carrier forces in advance. The leadership of these men, along with their coordinated efforts, proved crucial in making Midway a success. Their ability to act decisively, despite being outnumbered, helped turn the tide of the war. In the aftermath of the battle, Japan was left in shock. The loss of 4 carriers in a single day was a blow from which the Japanese Navy would never fully recover. Admiral Yamamoto, who had spearheaded the planning for Midway, was devastated by the defeat. The Japanese Navy had placed its hopes on Midway, believing that a decisive victory would pave the way for further conquests. Instead, it became a turning point, signaling the beginning of Japan's strategic decline in the war. In the wake of the battle, Japan's leadership began to reconsider their approach. They would attempt to regroup, but the loss of Midway would force them into a defensive posture for the rest of the war. While the victory at Midway was a crucial turning point, it came at a cost. The United States lost over 300 men and the USS Yorktown, which was heavily damaged in the battle and sank a few days later. For Japan, the losses were far greater. More than 3,000 men were killed, and the sinking of their 4 carriers left them without the naval superiority they had once enjoyed. Additionally, Japan lost irreplaceable aircraft and experienced pilots, further weakening their combat capabilities. Despite the toll, the battle had proven that the U.S. Navy could stand up to Japan and that victory was not only possible but within reach. The victory at Midway had a profound psychological impact on both the U.S. and Japan. For the United States, it was a much-needed morale boost, showing that despite the horrors of Pearl Harbor and early setbacks, the tide of the war could be turned. American propaganda capitalized on the victory, portraying the battle as a heroic triumph of the American spirit. In Japan, however, the defeat created confusion and demoralization. The loss of the carriers and experienced pilots severely impacted the Japanese Navy's confidence. Midway's impact went beyond the battlefield. It would shape the propaganda, military strategies, and public perceptions of the war in both countries for years to come. The Battle of Midway set the stage for the U.S. Navy's strategic shift from defense to offense. Following Midway, the United States began a series of island-hopping campaigns, retaking key territories in the Pacific and isolating Japan's strongholds. The success at Midway was a catalyst for future victories. It provided the momentum needed for the United States to press forward, culminating in the eventual invasion of Japan in 1945. The battle also highlighted the importance of maintaining a strong, capable Navy and Air Force to project power across the Pacific, a lesson the U.S. would carry with them in the decades to come. The Battle of Midway changed the course of naval warfare forever. It demonstrated the power of the aircraft carrier, marking the end of the era of battleships and the dawn of the aircraft carrier age. Midway's lessons in air superiority, intelligence gathering, and the importance of flexibility and strategy continue to influence naval tactics today. The battle also set a precedent for how intelligence and surprise could be used to gain a decisive advantage in modern warfare. The Battle of Midway was not just a victory in one battle, it was a defining moment in history. It shifted the balance of power in the Pacific, started the U.S. Navy on the path to victory, and marked the beginning of the end for Japan's dominance in the Pacific Ocean. Today, the legacy of Midway lives on as the United States Navy continues to be a dominant force on the world stage, shaped by the lessons learned in the skies and waters of that fateful battle. And while Midway was won by bombs and bravery, it was the intelligence, preparation, and leadership that turned the tide of history.